When you look at these hatches, it's a wonder that they don't leak worse than they do. This area has a lip that's about 1/8 of an inch high. I'm thinking it should be a 1/2 inch or maybe an inch. And over here, you can see that there's a gap that's really just inviting water to come through. I'd already tried replacing the gasket material with what the manufacturer supplies, and it didn't work very well. I got some modeling clay and closed the hatch on top of it. I measured the form with calipers and found that one side was about 3/8 of an inch and the other was about 1/2 of an inch. I took 2 different thicknesses of D-shaped foam gasket, so now I have 2 courses of gasket material on the inside of the hatch. I also added a wedge of Dow 795 on either side of the hinges, trying to make a smoother slope that the gasket could seal against. Here you can also see the 2 layers of gasket material. The end result are hatches that leak much less than they did before. Lee went to Atlanta and worked with some of our new boatyard friends for the canvas work. Thanks to our new friends, she now has the skill to be able to do this kind of work herself in the future. Getting the stack pack installed is a very big deal. It improves visibility tremendously and eliminates the blind spot that I had in the port forward side. Here's a trick for lining up your snaps with the snads. Put a piece of tape on the corner, press down on top of it. When you lift it up, there will be an impression of the hole where it needs to go. Insert your mandrel into the center of the hole to line up perfectly. We also cut pieces of reflective window insulation to go under the fifer techs. It makes a measurable difference in how hot the interior gets in the summertime, particularly in the south. We can remove these panels and just use the 70% fifer techs for privacy in the cooler climates. I wanted to make the propane system as safe as possible. The first thing that I did was to replace compression fittings with flare fittings. I also installed new sensors, a new solenoid, and a new hose with a new Acme fitting to go to the propane tank. I created a manifold with valves for each individual device. I shut off next to the tank the devices that I'm not using. There are 2 sides to the manifold. One is regulated and the other is non-regulated. The labels help me in avoiding mistakes and having to remember what goes where. I also added a fire extinguisher to the propane locker. I added an on-demand propane water heater that I mounted on the lid of the starboard stern locker. I needed to ensure that the lid was latched open before it would be operable. I inserted a simple mechanical anti-tilt switch in the ignition circuit. I added an additional fume sensor next to the heater. I also relocated the fume sensors inside the cabin so they couldn't be crushed by people's feet. I wanted a cleaner and a simpler galley. This is what I came up with. We have lots of storage space that I might put doors in front of eventually. I still need to add an aluminum backsplash behind the range. I've replaced the faucets and now have charcoal filtered fresh water. There is no dirt catching handle to open this pantry locker. I can access the centerboard without having to take the galley apart. The surface is flush with the trim so it won't catch dirt. The second pantry shelf has a lot of open-air storage and isn't visible from the salon. I replaced all the floorboard with waterproof laminate glued to sheets of expanded PVC. I used the originals as templates and also routed the edges so they'd fit snugly in the forms. I eliminated the cutouts for access to the bilges. I also eliminated the screws so they're not held down by anything except gravity. They haven't shifted at all while underway. It's easy to flip the whole floorboard up for access to the bilges with this finger hole. It's routed smooth as well. Some layers in the salon were a little springy underfoot. Adding a second layer of expanded PVC sheet stiffened them up. You can see that it's now clean and very easy to access the bilges. We've replaced the flushing head with a composting one that doesn't smell or pollute. I did some fiberglass work and it fits snugly. Securing it with rubber latches makes it legal. Unsnapping them allows access to the area where the plumbing used to be. With the elimination of these 2 through holes, I now only have 1 through hole for the entire boat. The area is dry and now there is no odor. I've also recovered 18 gallons of storage in the port forward locker. Lifting the first lid exposes the second lid, which gives access to the receptacles. This is simply a lined plastic bucket and a 1-gallon jug with a diverter between the two. The jug is dumped into the sink, and the bucket liner is tied up and tossed in the trash. The bucket remains perfectly clean, as does the case for it. Put in a fresh liner and you're good to go, pun intended. The sump pump had finally failed, so I replaced it with a new one and located the wires on top so they'd be out of any water that might collect in the bilge. I replaced the old switch with a flush-mounted LED lighted one that acts as a night light for the head. I added an AC outlet and 2 DC outlets in the salon under the table to eliminate wires running around the cabin. Wiping the rub rail with xylene will help restore its gloss, as you can see on the left in this shot. I cut down and relocated the bracket for the helm seat so it would no longer scrape my leg and I would still be able to move it forward and backward. I've been fearful of cutting my leg on this sharp corner, so I added a baby bumper. This is a shot of my digging gas tank floating in about 8 inches of water after a heavy rain. I have since added a Moeller Clearsight inline fuel water separator and have had no problems with water in the fuel. Transferring liquids and powders out of metal and paper containers into tight sealing high quality plastic bottles saves space, ensures the contents will stay fresh, and eliminates rust stains. I removed the guide flanges from my roller furling spool and have had no problems with it jamming ever since. This bracket allows me to change the angle of the solar panel. It's since been painted white. Several of the black acrylic cabinet door panels had cracked. I replaced them with white polycarbonate. I abraded then spray painted the back sides of the panels with white Rust-Oleum plastic paint to make them more opaque. Attach the handles with double-sided VHB tape instead of screws. I installed a couple of DC outlets and a fan in the stateroom. With the engine gone, we've saved a couple of £100 and have gained a large trash locker, or we could put an Engel freezer in there. This is our folding cockpit table that clamps onto the traveler track when not in use.